So welcome back to my office. Um, Very weird today. I'm gonna be reading one of my short stories. It's very tied in with a lot of other things that are happening in my world from a lot of other books. It's a very complicated idea. These short stories that I want to talk about, and so we'll get into more of that at the end once I've read it. So you're in my office right now with uh, my wife. She's doing a little bit of work. Say hi.
Hi.
She's working on her graphic design stuff. With one of my dogs here. This is Jordi. He's half English Bulldog and half Chocolate Lab. They're actually called Bulladors when you mix those two breeds together. He's very sweet. We got him when he was very young from a family that couldn't take care of him anymore. And as you can see, he's gotten pretty white. He's getting older. Still no less fun though. And Sadie, and she is in here too. You can see his little white eyebrows. It's actually kind of cool. Okay, so I want to talk about the clip that you saw at the beginning of the last video. You saw me stabbing knives into a table. That table is called my knife table, and it has those knives stabbed into it all the time. I got the idea from a comedian. His name is Kyle Kinane. He's really funny, and he was on a television show called The Stand-Ups, and he told a joke about a knife table. When we saw it, I saw it and I was like, that's cool. And my wife watched it with me, and it was like, I think, I don't know, like 3 months later, when I was like, hey, do you think we could get and she was like, knife table? She knew where it was going right away. She knew as soon as she heard the joke that she was going to have to buy me a knife table. So we got that. It's a lot of fun. When I get guests that come in and hang out in my office, they get to stab it. So it's got all kinds of nicks and burrs in it and everything, but you saw it's actually pretty thick, so it's going to be fine. And you saw a good part of my knife collection on that table. Thing is, I like knives, so I've got a lot of them, and I'm going to end up getting more. Okay, so that was that. I want to talk to you about something else you might have noticed. Maybe you didn't. In the clip, you saw me burp. You might have heard it too. I'm sorry about that. I know it's kind of gross. It's going to happen a lot. Because of the work and the stress of remembering everything and story going on all around me and the hallucinations that I see and all that kind of stuff, I have constant indigestion. It hasn't led to an ulcer yet, but I fear that one day it might. Anyway, I try to manage it as best I can, but it still ends up happening. So that's just something we're going to have to deal with here. I'm going to try to make it as the least noticeable that we can. So you won't have to see it. I'm not going to blah, all that kind of stuff, but it will happen. And for that I apologize. So when I read this, it's there's some parts in it where one of the characters is telling what has happened in the past. He's telling a story of what has happened in the past. And during those clips, in order to show that this is something that happened in the past, I'm going to play a very low bass line under it. So it'll be a very small amount of music that is on loop underneath it to kind of let you know that is happening in the past. It's not going to be noticeable, but it will. It's not going to be too noticeable. It won't be distracting, but it will be there to signify that we're talking about something that happened in the past. So look for that. And so I want to show you a couple of things. Here's a picture of my desk as it is today. And let me show you a few things. Okay, so this right here is, of course, my pen holder. And it was given to me by a friend of mine named Tom. He's a very cool guy. I met him in martial arts, when we were both in martial arts. And he gave this to me as a pen holder, and it used to be, he was in the military, and this used to be part of his canteen. And he still had it. I was very honored when he gave it to me. And I put as many pens and pencils in it as I possibly can so that I can just reach and grab. So at any particular point, I have between 30 and 40 pins in that thing at the same time, so that I never have to think about finding a pin, never have to worry about catching one. So this as well, you may not have seen, it blends in pretty well with the background that I have it in. This is a bottle opener from a company named Sloss. They went out of business. They were a cast iron company. They went out of business. The factory was somewhere down south. And a friend of mine went and visited it, and he brought me back that as a souvenir. So when I have company over or something like that, and I'm drinking a beer, we pop it open with that. So if you're drinking a beer right now and you want the entire experience of being in Jesse Tiller's office, find a can opener, close your eyes, pop it open, and pretend you're doing so with this Sloss. Yeah. Okay. The other thing is that I wanted to show you, you may have seen, is this right here. It's a small journal that a friend of mine sent me. It has a Plato quote that says, "The beginning is the most important part of the work." I use it to keep track of how many words I've written. Just jot them down in there and add them all up. And it was given to me as kind of a care package to make me feel better when a major character of my world died. And I had to kill him. And it was upsetting for a lot of people. It was upsetting for my alpha reader and my wife and me, and it threw us into a mess. So my alpha reader put together a package, and the package had a bunch of different things in it, and that was one of them. A couple coffee cups, some snacks and shit. Just a bunch of stuff to try to make us feel better about what had happened. So those are the things from my desk that I'm going to show you today. And I'm going to get started on the reading here as soon as I can. First, I want to introduce the concept. Basically, there is an object in my world called the Sour Eye, and it was ripped out of the eye of the god of time, and it has rotted over time, and it shows the past, and it shows the future, and you can go into it, travel into it, and manipulate the past and the future. And so what happened was I started noticing in my work that things were happening that I had no explanation for. And we'll get into that because I'm going to explain some of the things that happened. Things were happening I had no explanation for. And I started noticing that there was something going on that I couldn't see. Then the story of the Sour Eye came up, And I realized that what was happening behind the scenes of everything else that was happening was there was a war going on between two characters that were traveling back in time. And these two characters, one was trying to destroy the world, and the other one was trying to stop them. And so they're going around fighting against each other by moving pieces into place and stopping things from happening that are, Anyway, so that's what we're dealing with here. I'm writing a series of stories that are happening behind the scenes and showing how things ended up happening in the world. So you will see things in these stories that tie into things that weren't explained and didn't make sense in novels that I have written. Basically, what I'm telling you is there are two worlds in my work that are running parallel to each other. One is what's actually happening, and the other is this war between these two entities. And so sometimes there are multiple realities. I was having the problem where my world was happening in my head, and there was multiple realities that were spinning off, breaking because this might not have happened, or at this point this didn't happen, and stuff like this, and I was getting really confused. And in any particular book, I had like 3 or 4 realities going through my head at the same time, and I was trying to write one down. And this is kind of an explanation of the other realities that were going on in my head at the same time. If it sounds like a lot, and it sounds really confusing, it really is. So not only do I have the story of what's happening in my world going through my head, I also have these break-offs of what-ifs that I'm having to deal with. And this series of short stories helps me come to terms with that and deal with that and kind of release that pressure. So that is The Sour Eye. I'm going to read a story from it. The story is called The Slave, and it basically sets up the entire series by letting us see how it all began. So I'm going to start that dramatic reading now, and we'll see how it all runs out. So here we go. This is The Slave, and it is the first of the Sour Eye series. Okay, one more thing before I read this. There is a character whose name is Taigaka, and another character whose name is Kyria, and they go by the nicknames of Taiga and Kai, and so they're kind of used interchangeably at times. Okay. This piece is called The Slave, and it happens 1 year after the escape. The darkness of the pit was broken only by the soft yellow glow of the chain wrapped around Taigaka's Kala's wrists. At his request, they had been clamped onto his body, and though he had bound thousands of criminals in these chains, just like these, he was not prepared for the humiliation and the pain they caused. He looked up the shaft of the pit to a grate 200 feet above him. The walls of the shaft were solid crystal, the same crystal every Chimerian knight used to make their swords, and the same crystal used to build the great castle the order lived in. Taigaka closed his eyes. He longed to rub the knot in his brow and ease his headache, but the chains would not let him lift his hands that high. He looked at the shaft, seeing not far to his left the faint glow of the shackles of another criminal. The darkness would not let him see just who was in the cell next to his, but the soft yellow glow showed him he was not alone. Maybe 20 feet to his left stood another soul locked in crystal. There was no breaking out of here. Taigaka knew dozens of spells that would lift him from the situation like this, but knew hundreds that would shatter these bonds in a breath, but encased within his crystal it was not wise. He summoned up the image of the last time he saw his son, and fought back tears. Taigaka was not left long. The Tremerians knew only mercy. They would want to speed his trial along swiftly. When the grate was pulled back and a hook and rope lowered to him, he sighed in relief. He simply wanted the next part over. Taiga lifted the chain around his wrists, attached him to the hook, and was pulled up. Seconds later, he was walking through the dungeon he had built over 120,000 years ago. Thousands of grates led to thousands of shafts, housing thousands of prisoners. Taiga walked above them, gripped by a deep sadness, knowing he would never again place a prisoner here, would never again see justice done. He was led through the halls of the Crystal Citadel, his home since the God War, and he quietly said goodbye to all of it. He was shocked and horrified faces of every knight and squire he passed, all about to be sick as he was marched past them in chains. When he stepped into the great hall of justice, he saw a long, narrow walkway carved and faceted with many symbols of justice and light. He stepped over every one of them, his eyes down. He had this room memorized, every detail of it ingrained upon his soul. Just yesterday, this had been his seat of power. When he stopped before the 3 benches of the hall, he nearly wept. Glimmer sat the bench to his left, Comely the one to his middle, and though he had promised himself he would not look, Taiga could not help himself from seeing the chair to the right empty, a chair he had occupied for 120,000 years. The balconies were filled with knights staring down at him. 20 high balconies wrapped the entire room where any knight could come see justice doled out. Taiga had wondered if they would convene his trial in private, but when he looked up, seeing hundreds of knights in attendance, he knew better. Taigaka Kala has come before his peers in error, Glimmer said. There is no one I would believe if told this man ever committed a crime. No man or woman could convince me. Taiga is as devoid of sin as any one person can be. In fact, this trial would not even be called into hearing had he not expressly requested it. Out of love for this man, I will hear his confession, but nothing he says will cause me to turn away from him. Taigaka loved Glimmer so much for the words spoken, but he could not let them soften his resolve. Comely looked at Taigaka with a sad smile. She waved a hand before him and nodded. Here we sit, in the justice room you built so long ago, waiting for this confession, my love. Please tell me what crime you have committed that you would have us punish you for. Earlier today, in the land of the Reft, I killed my son, Kaira Kawa. I killed him with these hands. Taiga looked at the hands and flexed them. I killed him in wrath. I killed him in hate. I've come here for justice. A flurry of gasps and protest broke out, and Glimmer and Comely let the room break into chaos. They sat staring, their eyes fixed on Taiga as he stared back. I don't believe you, Glimmer said. Why you are doing this is beyond me, but there is nothing you can say to make me believe you killed your only son. The idea is preposterous. Comely said nothing. She simply stared at Taiga, her eyes calculating and appraising. Allow me to tell you what drove me to this abominable act, and I will let you weigh the truth of my words, Taigaka said. Fine. Explain yourself now, or admit this as a grim farce, Glimmer said. Taiga looked at his hands, and the chains wrapped around his wrist, and he fidgeted them a bit. He heard the rattle a moment before they shrunk tighter on his wrist, cutting into his flesh. He sighed and looked up. We all felt Dattler Shiloh die. Felt the moment that preceded it, when the portal to the land of the Reft was open after so many years. After a short deliberation, we all, you two and myself, agreed we needed to go and see if we could find the object we called the Sour Eye. Taiga closed his eyes and focused on his words, on what he had decided to say. When I agreed to go, you told me to bring someone with me. I chose Karia. Father, what can you tell me about this place? Kai said. His voice was soothing, a beautiful instrument that filled Taiga with hope. They hit the ground in Mate before an ancient tower Taiga remembered very well. Dozens of times he had come here to arrest or even kill Dali the Elder eons ago. Every time he had been repelled. Glimmer and Taiga had come here once with Baron and Connaughton, and they had all been sent fleeing. The world's most devastating wizard had once called this place home, but that taint in the air was gone. Taiga felt the moment Dali had died, as if the world had sloughed off a sickness. The air was pure. The tower stood in the winter's day, frozen to its spot, caked over with ice and hoarfrost. The door that had for millennia been sealed was now exploded nearly off its hinges. The tower that had so long been locked was now open. Dali has been locked out of this place for generations beyond telling. How is it now stands open as a mystery? This is impossible, son. It cannot be. Connaughton taught us at the Citadel many eons ago, that nothing is possible, Kai said. Taiga ducked his head into the building, pulling his crystal sword and stepping in. He gripped it in both hands and stared at the flat of the blade until it glowed with a white light. Dali was locked out of this place. Within stands the only portal that can allow passage of the ancient. This world we will strive to enter now has been beyond us for over 100,000 years. This is how Dali got back to his home, but I still don't know how he did it, said Taiga. They reached a set of crumbling stairs, and Taiga bent down to touch the powdering brick. He spoke a word, and the stone began to harden and reform. The stairs that had a moment before been little more than dust resembled themselves once again. Taiga waited, and when they were sound, he climbed them. The tower was not large, it was not formidable in any sense, but it carried a faint darkness, as if the walls had seen things, terrible things, they could not forget. They climbed a few floors. Every time they neared a door, Taiga held his hand out, sensing nothing, and moving on, until he reached the door that thrummed with power. Taiga stepped aside and nodded to his boy. Kai screamed out a note, and the door exploded. He pulled his slightly curved crystal sword and rushed in quickly. Taiga watched Kai's white cloak flutter through the doorway and into the inky black, and for a moment he could not breathe. For just a second, it looked as if the tower had simply opened its jaws and swallowed his son. Taiga heard Kai singing in the darkness and followed, ready for death. Kai's song illuminated the room in ways Taiga's sword could not, revealing faint wisps of forgotten movement, ghostly shapes that told of the passage of people. 3 people had been here. 3 of them dropped to the ground as an immense shadow overtook the room. The shadow must have been Dali. It loomed huge and horrible over the 3 forms before rushing into the corner and disappearing. They stood for a few moments and stumbled to the corner where they disappeared. When the song was done, Taiga walked to the corner to see a collection of planks bound together by ropes. He cast a few spells of detection to determine the sort of incantation needed, and when he spoke it, the boards lifted into the air. They swelled and expanded until they formed a great portal. The boards hung suspended by ropes as they swayed and bucked. Within a few seconds, a great hole ripped open within the planks, and a horrid landscape opened beyond them. The ground was red, the sky orange. It stretched out before them mercilessly, until at a great distance they saw a lone figure. Taiga looked at his son, fear playing across Kai's features that broke Taiga's heart. "I am with you, son," Taiga said. "Together we can face anything." Taiga nodded, and they entered. "We found the landscape as we expected," Taiga said. He looked at the knights above him, and his heart snapped in pieces as their disbelief soured to derision. "This was the land we sent the elder magic to when it was taken from our world. The ground was still wet with the blood of the gods. It was obvious to me why Dali had chosen this spot as the hub of his empire, and why he built his great tower here. The place was filthy with elder magic. It seemed to boil up from the ground like smoke from searing meat. If not for our swords, we would have been able to wield our magics at all. But as you know, the crystal of our order does not suffer the ill effects of elder magic. We walked in, and when we had our feet and knew what to expect from the world, we lifted into the sky and flew for the only landmark in the entire area. We flew for the figure. When they lifted off the ground, the magic they cast detonated in the air, as elder magic always does, but as the horrid backlash rose to explode upon the air, the crystal swords drank the magic in. Taiga's sword trembled within his grasp as he flew, and he watched it fill with the blood-red smoke of elder magic fallout. As they approached the figure, Taiga realized this was not a walking person, but a building. The sky screamed past them at crippling speeds, and Taiga had to slow his breathing and fight back his fear as the horror of Dali's tower became evident. The tower was big the way a dream could be big. It was the size of a nightmare. It rose immense and black and seemed to waver and sway as if it were far too high to support its own weight. The tower's peak stood in low-lying clouds, and Taiga could not see the work being done atop it. The building was falling down even as it was being built. Massive holes pocked the outside as if the flesh of the tower had been blown off of it. Entire floors sat exposed and gutted with only the barest skeletal components holding it up. Supports and pillars alone meagerly bearing the top sections of the tower. The building burned. It seemed entire floors were being devoured by flame. Outside the flame, lattice had been built onto the tower's flesh, so bent and twisted creatures could move building supplies to the topmost spire. Even as the tower was falling apart, even if it was burning and crackling with flame, the beings of this world still struggled to build the tower of Dali higher, for fear that one day their master would come back, and his ire would be raised by their sloth. Taiga dropped to the ground at the tower's base, and Kai landed deftly beside him. "Can you find what we're looking for in that immense structure, Father?" Kai asked. Taiga looked into his son's face and saw utter devotion. Saw a powerful man crafted by the order of the Trimerian Knights for situations just like this. But as he looked, Taiga could not help but see the young boy Kai had been so long ago. "Our purity will draw us to it. The Samurai is here. It will be the bane to our light," Taiga said. "I just hope another fiend has not come here to find it first." I can't find words foul enough for the sensation that crawled across my body when I opened my third eye and gazed about for the artifact. It was as if I was inviting a sickness into my flesh, as if welcoming leprosy within you and feeling it grip you and sink into your very person. The Samurai sank into us like a man might sink into a bath. We both know from what direction we were being called. We did not hesitate. My son and I lifted into the air and flew off to find it. We punched through the outer walls of the floor below the artifact, and then flew into the level before slamming into the floor and coming up within sight of the sour eye. "What did you see?" Glimmer asked. "Is that time, Father?" Kai asked. Taiga knew it was. He looked at the room around him. Strands of darkness stretching from the center of the room like veins that splayed in every direction. These strands reached out to grip the ceiling and floor. They gripped the walls. They seemed as if the great black web had reached out to every surface of the room and gripped tight. In places the webbing swelled pregnant before blooming like a sickening flower to display a scene. Taiga felt the horror of dark revelation as memories came back to him of the scenes he witnessed. Flashes of time are what they were. Images of our life. I saw, as if for the first time, the spell we three had cast during the God War. I saw again the horror of the armies before our gates. The hopelessness we felt at that moment fell upon me again. I remembered the spell, how damaging it was. I could feel again the horrible effect of the elder magic as it hit us. Taiga felt anger boiling up in him as he looked at Glimmer and Comely and snapped at them as he realized his life was over. "Do you remember that day, Glimmer? Do you recall, Comely, the time before our swords when elder magic gripped us fast and squeezed the very life out of us?" "We could not forget," Glimmer said. "That is why we're here, Taiga. You called us together to hear of your "I know why we are here," Taiga shouted. "I'm telling my confession the best I can. Now answer me. Do you remember the feeling of elder magic gripping us, locking us in this crystal we stand in now? Do you remember the horror of it, being encased in this place?" "It was a sacrifice I gladly made," Comey said. "We gladly made. What does that have to do with this moment right here?" "It has everything to do with it, Comely. The fear, the crippling horror of those days trapped in this crystal, before they hollowed us out, before they saved our lives and our torments. Before all of that, when it was just us, here, locked in this place, suffocating, our bones crushing, every moment hell. When I saw these scenes, I found that level of horror again. Because, can't you see? It's all true. The things we talked about, the things we feared might be freed if the sour eye ever got loose. It's all true. I was looking at our nightmare. The sour eye could take us into time itself. We could walk that time as if we were a spider crawling across a web. Could fit ourselves into every moment and live there. Tiger closed his eyes and squeezed his fist so hard his fingernails cut into his palms he could feel blood bubbling between his fingers. The sour eye was everything we feared it was and more. The sour eye was the very summit of true power. The power to see an event before it happens, to step into it and act. To strangle the babe who would become a monster or even a hero. Ty smiled grimly up at Glimmer and laughed. The power to shove a nation over into darkness or build it in our image. Ultimate power over our enemies. A lifetime within every second to dwell in. A lifetime within every breath to commit miracles or sins. Glimmer held his hand up to still Taiga, but this was the important part, and he could not allow himself to be stilled. Easy, Taiga. We can figure all this out. Shut your mouth, Glimmer, Taiga said. The fate of darkness was upon me. I had within my grasp the means with which to cure the world of evil, and I could feel it working its way into my spine. Do you know what true power feels like, Glimmer? Do you, Cumling? Do any of you know what true power feels like? Taiga looked at the balconies where the other knights stood silently judging him. You know that we have known power, Taiga. You have sat here beside us while we wield it, Cumley said. You think this is power? Taiga said, motioning to a room around him. You look around you now and you see power? Are you that arrogant? Are you so arrogant you think sitting here compares with standing before the sour eye? Taiga laughed and spat on the floor. This room knows no real power. Within my reach, I had the strength to crush my enemies before they were even enemies. I could go to Risada and simply nudge him off a bridge when he was a child. I could walk to that bastard Seikobar we all fear so much and grip his head while yet a suckling infant, and with the flasks of my fists make him a dullard for life instead of the stuff of nightmares. No force could rise above me. No order could contain me. At once, upon looking at the sour eye, I knew I had to have it. Knew I had to possess it. So I could fix the world. Shape it into my image. The strands all reached the middle of the room and hold tight to a globe. It looked to be glass, but within it moved a green and yellow light that swirled in hypnotic patterns. Would you believe me if I told you that it knew my name? That it had her voice? That all at once it spoke my name? I felt real lust close around me, like the fists of the goddess of sex. I took off my clothing, erection painful and large as I neared it. Taiga closed his eyes and drew in a deep breath. That is when I saw him, Taiga spat. Kai, before the eye. He did not hear its voice. It did not want him. Taiga turned to the balconies. It did not want him, he shouted. It wanted me, he said, looking at Glimmer. It didn't want any of you. It was calling for me. Taiga shivered as the memory passed by him yet again. The sight of Kai's face as the two of them realized just what they were looking at, the certainty in their eyes. Taiga curled his hands in the fists again, looked to the ceiling and screamed. I could not stop him before he sheathed his sword into it. Taiga summoned up every ounce of wrath he had and he spat. He slid his sword directly into the eye and it shattered. He stared at the floor and fought for breath. He struggled to get the face of his son out of his mind, but he knew it would never leave him. What did you do, Taiga? Glimmer said with equal parts question and statement. Everyone in the room knew how this story ended. I didn't use my sword, Taiga said. I didn't unsheath it. I curled my fists in their knots, and with rage and hate and loss in my heart, I punched my son. I punched my Kyra in the face, and it shattered, just like the eye had. I grabbed him by the throat and bashed his head into the floor. I slammed him over and over again against the floor until his skull was a mash of bone, hair, and meat. Taiga lifted his hands and smeared them against his face. It was sweet to feel the blood on my skin. They couldn't even look at him when they handed down his sentence. He laughed at them and spat. He shouted that he was not really there, and that he was back in time avenging himself, and he let them drag him back to the crystal shaft and leave him alone with his torment. He waited his beheading, and Taiga allowed himself to weep. For hours of darkness before a voice. The shaft around him rang with the force of it, and Taiga looked up to the ceiling as it ripped away. The well he stood in was torn to bits, and above he could see the Valkyrie in all her horror. Her face locked in a perpetual snarl stared down at him. Her tucks gleamed, her flaming hair crackled around her head, and she stared at him with black eyes. "Tagaka Kala," she spat. "How long have you known me?" "We've been friends for millennia. Much justice we found at each other's side. You've long been my favorite of the centuries I have worked with. Have you come to watch me die?" "It seems you've learned a new trick since last we saw each other," she said. "Murder?" Taiga said. "Lying," the Valkyrie corrected. "I have no idea what you're doing, but I've come here to answer that question. Why have you lied to your council? Why are you throwing your life away?" "Please, mighty sentry, keep your voice down," Taiga said. "No one but you can see me or hear my words. We're safe. If I tell you what happened, if I explain my reasons, you must swear to never tell another soul, not even your noble kin, and you must not stand in my way. This must all play out as I have designed it, or we're all lost. You have my word. I will let you die if I can, and I will keep this meeting sacred. But tell me why my friend is committing suicide, because I may not be able to see into other worlds, but I can smell a lie when one is told. And you reek." "Father, look at this," Kai said. Taiga turned to see a form suspended in the far side of the orb. It was wrapped entirely in the black strand, save one eye that stared wide and green. The eye looked infected and sick. The body was large, under the webbing and bulky. They stepped through the room carefully, ducking and stretching, to move cautiously around the strands. When they stood before the body, Taiga looked into its eyes, then the direction it was staring. It looked behind him, and noticed the being had been held up and staring at the sour eye. Taiga swiped his sword. Its very tip sliced the webbing over the mouth. When the mouth was freed, it let out a mournful cry that chilled Taiga's blood. He looked at the creature, seeing great pain and unrest, and Taiga thought he saw something else. "We must free him," Kai said. Even though Taiga knew it would be the merciful thing to do, he felt this being needed to be bound. Kai's sword whispered once, then a second time across the webbing that held the man suspended. The strands parted like flesh beneath the blade, and the man seeped to the ground. He knelt, face down, shrouded by filthy hair. He held himself up on uncertain hands and stared at the floor. "Who are you?" Taiga asked. Kai took a knee and touched the man's shuddering soldier. "Are you okay?" Kai's voice was soft as a summer breeze, light as a ray of sunshine. It seemed not to belong in this cursed place at all. "How many years have I been locked here?" the man rasped. "Who brought you here?" Taiga said. "The fiend Dali imprisoned me in this place. And you've been here for thousands of years, for Dali has not been able to come to this place in at least that long," Kai said. The man drew a deep breath and let out a roar. His entire body trembled, and he looked up at Tai. Instantly, Tai saw that one of the man's eyes had been ripped from his head. He fought to get to his feet, and Kai helped him. "What is your name, stranger?" Taiga said. He realized then that he was gripping his sword too tight. It seemed every muscle in his body was tensed. "I am Harask, the manipulator." "Manipulator of what?" Kai said. "Time," the man said. "There is but one god of time, and he is Tiana," Taiga said. "They called me that once," Harask said. "But then came a maggot god, and he whispered to me. He taught me that time was not a thing to guard, it was a thing to guide." Taiga gripped Kai's shoulder and pulled him back. "You're a god then?" "I am a cure," the man said. "The cure to what?" "The light," Harass spat. He looked at the green glowing orb before him, and he sneered. Taiga brought his sword to bear, nodding to Kai to do likewise. They lowered them at Harask, but with a swipe of his hand he batted them both aside. Harask leapt and spread his arms as he collided with the orb. There was a blinding light of sour green before him. With a pop and a hiss, Harask was gone. Taiga looked at Kai and shook his head. "That was not a good man," he said. "We have made a grave mistake." His heart slowed, and he wiped sweat from his brow. Kai began to walk the room, peering into the bulging sections of the strand, when one of them opened before him. Kai's face was bathed in a sickly green hue, his eyes wide open, and he nearly cried out. He looked up at Taiga in horror. "I can see him here," Kai said. "He's trying to kill a child." Kai seemed unable to blink, mesmerized by the terror of the scene. "What child?" "Her name is Jocelyn. She's 3. He has cut her. She is wailing." Taiga looked into the swirling knot of strands, and it opened. Harask stood on a great mountain top. His body swelled, his muscles bulged, and within minutes he was 10 times his size. He gripped the very summit of the mountain and with little effort tossed it away. At his feet sat a square plate of steel. He gripped it and pulled, and out of the mountaintop came a massive cube. He tore it to shreds with his hands, and Taiga saw the cowering figure of the Dragon Queen Ember within it. "He has freed Ember. The horrors she will commit are beyond reckoning." Taiga's body did not know whether to cower in fear or burst into sobs. He was too overwhelmed by the terror of what he saw. Kai stood before another swollen sack. He seemed too terrified to look, but his resolve was iron. Taiga knew the feeling. They had just released a horror upon the world. They needed to witness what they had wrought. When the strands opened, Kai's face pulled into an ugly mask of fear. "He's crippled Peter Red Fists. Harask has crippled the boy of hope, the one we all heard of. The answer to so many problems. Peter is crippled." It was Taiga's turn before the pregnant, pulsing nightmare. He stared dejected and unmanned by the nameless crime about to play out before him. When the strand peeled back like a scab from a festering wound, Taiga saw Harask again, this time meddling with the nation of the Furies on the mountains of Nether. He shoved and he whispered, and a war broke out on the mountain. Years flashed by in a blink, and the Fury nation had been eradicated entirely. "He has an army and is wiping out a village. He is trying to kill Thrak and Ithrin Debane," Kai said. "Father, what have we done?" Taiga stumbled to his son and grabbed him by the shoulders. Kai looked near to panic, and Taiga saw tears in his son's eyes. "We have to go in after him," Taiga said. "We have to fight him and put it all right again. He is destroying our world." "Father, what if we don't come back?" Tai said. "What if we can't come back and the Knights send people looking for us? This is far too much power. The Order will try to control it. This is the kind of power that can and will corrupt good men." "Then one of us will go back and tell them we couldn't find the Sour Eye," Taiga said. But he could instantly see the problem. Taiga or Kai would have to go back alone. He shook his head and gritted his teeth. "You will go back and tell them I'm dead." "They will ask where your sword is, Father," Kai said. "They will have expected me to carry it back with them. Without your sword you could not fight this evil. I will not send you forward or back in time to fight this god without your sword." Taiga saw it then. The pure lunacy of it chewed at his mind. "You have to kill me," he said. Kai looked at him in horror. "By that I mean you have to go back to the Citadel and tell them you have killed me. And that when you do, you broke my sword." Kai gasped. He looked at his father in horror and shook his head. "I cannot, Father, do not make me do that. They will kill me. They will..." And Taiga knew that he could not. He could not ask his son to lose the honor and glory of knighthood and be shamed for life, his legacy ruined. Taiga could not let his son take the blame for this crime. He took Kai by the shoulders and squeezed. He kissed his boy on the forehead, noting eyes that had belonged to Kai's mother. "You look so much like her," Taiga wept. He tried to memorize his son's face and nodded. "Find the Terika clan. They can see into the future. They can help you." "Father, no. I cannot let you," Kai began, but Taiga could not let him finish. Taiga turned Kai toward the orb and shoved him. He kicked his son in the back, and Kai flew away. He hit the Sour Eye, and with a blinding explosion of light and a hiss, Kai Kala was gone. They did not make him wait long for justice. That night Glimmer pulled him out of the well and set him on the ground. Glimmer could not look up. Taiga stood waiting. Every guard around him had been dismissed. The entire area was free of knights. Glimmer turned as if to say something before spinning and punching Taiga in the face. Taiga had once fought a dragon in the wilds of Kestic, and the dragon had called down a bolt of lightning from the sky. The bolt hit Taiga so hard, he had been deaf for a time and blind. He barely survived the struggle, and on that day, Taiga had sworn no strike could ever hit him as hard. This one was harder. When Glimmer's punch hit, Taiga lifted off the ground and flew through the air. He slammed into the wall and felt his back shatter from the impact. Taiga sagged to the floor, then lifted his head to see Glimmer sobbing. Taiga's heart snapped in half, and he closed his eyes, praying for the strength to face his friend of countless years. Glimmer slowly walked to Taiga's side, and though the pain was horrendous, Taiga could not let himself be healed. If Vaniel Eteron healed him, it would be obvious that he was still an honored son. Glimmer would not have to think hard to realize Taiga's lie. As Glimmer came slowly, head down and weeping, Taiga sent up his last prayer to Vaniel Eteron. Mighty God, I love so much. Do not place your healing hand on me. Swear off my name, and never call glory to me again. Abandon the one you love so much, and do not look down on my torment or my soul. Let me fade from you forever, and please, Vaniel, be with my glorious son. Help him in his silent war. Make him smart, make him lethal. Bring him home to his people if you can, and ease their suffering when they realize what they have done. At the end of his prayer, he felt his God turn away, and Taiga was truly alone. "You've ruined it all," Glimmer said. His words were barely over a whisper, but they sliced into Taiga like a shout or a scream. "You were my hero. You were the one I looked up to. You, Tagaka Kala, are the one I spent my life trying to emulate. This sin you've committed is an abomination to your soul, your family, and your legacy. Everything you did, every great thing you accomplished, every person you saved, and every way you served is foul now. I don't want to know you. I wish I'd never met you," Glimmer said. He turned his back, and Glimmer's head lowered as he looked at his feet. "Unless I'm wrong, tell me this is a lie, and I will save a soft spot in my heart for a friend I once had, and the man who taught me so much. Tell me I'm missing something, that this is part of a bigger plan, and I will hold a bit of love I once had for you." "I am what you think I am," Taiga said. "I am the sum of my deeds, be they foul or fair." Glimmer held his hands out and light strobed. The room was suddenly filled with knights. They blinked in surprise and looked at Glimmer. "Pick him up." "He cannot walk," Glimmer said. "He's a broken man. I realize now he may have been for a long time." Taiga felt a yawning hole open before him. He sobbed as two men grabbed his arms and dragged him across the floor to the prison. The night was dark and cloudy, betraying no stars and no moons, as Tagaka was dragged out of the crystal citadel and into the town. He was walked up the empty streets and byways, and Taiga realized the Tremerian knights had cleared the streets. His shame was so great, his fellows did not even want the people to know what he'd done. He wondered if they would proclaim he died in some great battle in some far-off section of the world. He knew if they heard the fabricated story he had told, the people would lose heart. His downfall would be the fall of a nation. They carried him up to a platform built of soy wood, the same wood that grew in the forest of shame on the far side of the country. The sight of the black wood sent a chill down Taiga's spine. When he died on that cursed wood, his soul would forever be housed in that infamous woods. He allowed himself a few tears as he thought of the perpetual sorrow and grief he would feel when his soul was banished to that forlorn place. They dragged him to the center of a platform and dropped him to the ground. His back screamed in agony. He felt the crease in his spine, and he gasped from pain, and he laid sprawled on the boards. Glimmer and Comely stood over him for a long time. Finally, Comely spoke. "Let me take him to the waters of prose. Let me drop him in, and he will ease to the bottom, a slow, painless death. Let his mind rest there. Let his soul be housed in the waters of hope," she said. Glimmer turned back to Taiga. "No. His crime is too grim. Let him suffer in the wood. Let him wander and mourn and never find rest. Taiga sighed, and Glimmer stared down at him. For the love I held for your son, I damn you completely. I send you to a hell of my choosing. I banish you to the forest of shame. At least lift me to my knees, Taiga said. Please don't let me die like this, on my gut, my face on the floor. No, Glimmer said. You die like this. I will set you up, Kimberly said. She bent to grab him, and Glimmer stopped her. Where's his sword, Taigaka? What did you do to your only son's sword? Did you bring it for us so we could retire it in the Hall of Legends? Did you carry it away from his corpse so the life within it could find rest? Glimmer asked. What did you do with your son's sword? I used my own to shatter it, Taiga said. Dali heard to speak. Comely gasped. Glimmer sobbed. He pulled his sword free from its teeth and raised it high above his head. Suddenly the sky ripped open with a titanic scream, and above them all hung the image of utter justice. Above them steamed the Valkyrie. Hold that blade, she screamed. Glimmer looked up in defiance. I will not, he snapped. This man dies. This foul beast at my feet will suffer in loss for all eternity. You have no say in this. I know a better punishment than an afterlife of simply wandering and sobbing. I know better than any how to cause the foul to suffer. I am the horror of justice. And what would you do with him? Comely asked. I have a pet. A foul monster of a man I have pressed into my service, the Valkyrie said. Give this beast of a kin killer to me, and I will force him under my will as well. I will punish Taiga the Foul for the rest of time as I force him to do my work. He will be my executioner. He will hunt those I tell him to hunt, and he will suffer as no one has suffered before, my lash. She snapped her wrist out, and a whip burst into flames. With a second snapping of the cord, it wrapped around Taiga's body. Taiga screamed in horrible agony as the whip seared his flesh. He should have been able to smell his flesh burn, but the familiar scent of burning skin did not greet his nose. She tightened her whip around him, and he burned even hotter. He screamed for mercy, but it would not come. He burned long and hot until finally the whip pulled away. My lash will be his terror, my punishing his yoke, the Valkyrie said. I will not allow this, Comely said. Death and misery, maybe, she said. It is possible I can live with that. Slavery is too high a price to pay. For kin-killing? Glimmer shouted. Too high a price to pay for kin-killing? As far as I'm concerned, there is no price high enough. Let him serve. Let him hunt and be despised. Let him suffer as he brings down her form of justice on the world. I find it fair. Glimmer waved a hand at Taiga. Take him. This way I will not have to clean his foul blood from my pristine blade. Glimmer spoke the words, but Taiga knew that Glimmer had been forced to kill him with that sword. He never would have wielded it again. The halls of the vault sang when he walked into them. Taigaka stepped into this home of the centuries and felt the weight shift off his shoulders. The Valkyrie dropped down to his size and walked beside him. You will spend your afterlife here, with us, she said, with those who will cherish you and keep you from harm. What will you tell my order when they do not see me walk beside your master? Taiga said. I will tell them you escaped me, she said. Escape? Do not tell me you could not do it if you wanted to, she said. You could walk out that door right now, and not only could I not stop you, I could disappear, and you could disappear and never be seen again. I cannot, Taiga said. If you tell Glimmer I have escaped you, he will search for me for the rest of his life. He will never forgive me, never forget what he thinks I have done. I will not torture him with thoughts of my escape. Put me with your monster. It will ease Glimmer to know I am suffering. I will not, she said. You will have to. If you don't, Glimmer will never find rest. He must see me suffer, must feel my pain, and be able to come visit me and watch me burn if he wants to, Taiga said. Only then can he find any modicum of peace from this. If I put you with my servants, I will have to torture you, the Valkyrie said. I will be forced to make you suffer, and I will be able to kill what you send me after. I will be able to fight evil as I have done all my life. Do not sheathe my blade forever, and do not curse my best friend with recklessness and pain. He will suffer enough without me by his side. Taiga talked to the Valkyrie for hours. She was adamant, but he finally wore her down. From the sky as fast and as hard as a lightning bolt, Taiga dropped to the ground. It was hard and cold, unforgiving, and a merciless tract of land in a nation of drying. He stared down at the vile beast of the man and saw the man start. He pulled back, fought his way to his feet as Taiga dropped to a knee. The man almost ran, but his arrogance could not stop him from looking back at the one on his knee. Taiga knew this man. He had seen him grow from a vile little boy to a vile man, and Taiga knew him well. My name is Taiga. My last name was lost to time. I'm at your service. Do you know me, servant? Seikobar spat. You are Seikobar of Dragon's Bane. Who told you my name? The same one that bound me to your service. And who is that? The one I am slave to, the mighty and terrible Valkyrie. Seikobar smiled suddenly. He threw his head back and laughed. She has given you to me to play with, hasn't she? I know not her intention, master, but it was my understanding that she does not play nor give gifts. I am to be your tool, nothing more. You must use me to carve out the heart of evil and bring terror into the world of the dark. I will use you for many things, slave, but first you will tell me how you came to find yourself enslaved to the Valkyrie. I bound myself to her, master. Why? Seikobar asked. For penance. She is my punishment. Seikobar pulled closer. What did you do that made you repent? Taigaka would not say. He would never tell anyone about Kai. If Seikobar looked into Kai at all, he would find him. This was not a story Taiga could tell. That is between me and the Valkyrie. Seikobar stepped forward, grabbed Taiga by the hair and jerked his face back. He pulled his fist back for a strike and snarled, You would tell me your sins, slave. I must know the kind of mind I employ. Taiga opened his third eye just a bit, and Seikobar drew back. He stared at Taiga and gasped. You are Tremerian. Seikobar jerked Taiga to his feet by his hair. Give me your weapon, Seikobar demanded. Taiga hesitated. Was it wise to hand over a relic this powerful to a man so vile? Taiga knew Seikobar was a fiend, but if Taiga really needed to kill him, he could. And he knew the Valkyrie would never let Seikobar keep the sword. He pulled it slowly and handed it to Seikobar. Seikobar gripped the weapon, pulling it close to his eyes and nearly dropped it in surprise. You're a Tremerian knight! Taiga lowered his head. I was a knight, yes. What order? They are called arms, Taiga corrected. Seikobar slapped him. Answer me, slave. I was in the royal arm. Seikobar gasped. That is how I know you. You're the greatest of the Tremerian knights. I am not the greatest of the knights. Who is the greatest? I mustn't speak his name, Taiga said with a shudder. Why, slave? You disobey. There will be punishments for insubordination. If I speak his name, he will find me. He will find you? Seikobar said. What happens if he finds you? He will take his vengeance, Taiga said. Fine. You will keep your secrets for now, but I will learn them in time. We are going into the abyss, fool. How will your crystal sword hold up there? The enchantments will fall away, and upon the first strike, the blade will shatter. You need a weapon. Follow me, Seikobar snapped. Taigaka Kala took his first step forward into the dark bonds of grim but necessary servitude. A willing slave, for the love of the sun. Yes, master. Alright. So that's the slave. There's a lot that I want to explain about what I've just read and how it ties in with other pieces of my work. But first I need a break and a drink and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. I will be right back. Okay, so that was my reading of The Slave. You're going to notice that in the last two videos, I read The Alchemist and The Cannibal, and I did a lot of tripping up on myself. But when I read The Slave, it was a much better reading. And you'll find out, if you remember, in the last video, I was talking to Richard Nell I was explaining to him the first story that I wrote, the one about the jack-o'-lantern, and how I was standing in front of the class and my hands were trembling. And then as soon as I got into the story, everything slowed down. I was in the story and reading, and it didn't freak me out at all. That is what happens to me when I read. I will explain why in stuff in the future, in videos in the future. I'll explain why I calm down a lot like that. I'll explain why this reading was so dramatic, with so much action. I'm acting in it and all that kind of stuff. I'm gonna explain all of that. But that you're gonna have to wait for that because we still have a lot to do in this episode. I'm gonna talk now about some of the things that you heard in there that might not make sense, or things that tie into other books. So first, let's talk about Glimmer. We have seen him before. Glimmer is in the book Onslaught of Madness. He comes in to get a sword from somebody that has died. And you get to see just how powerful Glimmer is. And if you see how powerful Glimmer is, you get an idea of how powerful the character Taiga is from in there. Glimmer was also in the book Hemlock. He gave two of the swords to the two of the swords that had the brothers trapped in them. He gave them to Rafe. That's also where you saw the Crystal Citadel. It's a huge building made out of crystal, and it is the lair of the Tremerian Knights. He talks about casting. Taiga talks about casting the spell during a war when the enemy was at the gates. He talks about casting this spell and the effect because of elder magic. Elder magic is magic from the death of the gods. And when it was laying around in puddles, what would happen is somebody would cast using that magic, and there would be huge side effects of casting the magic. Well, those three people, Glimmer, Cumley, and Taiga, all casted this spell that destroyed the army outside of the gates. And when they did, it created this massive piece of crystal that they were stuck in. Everybody went in and tunneled them out, and then they tunneled out all the rooms and everything in the Crystal Citadel, and that's what they live in. So the Crystal Citadel is the side effects of a great spell cast when Elder Magic was still around. That's why they all make their swords out of this crystal, and it can soak up Elder Magic so they didn't feel the after effects or the destructive effects when they were in the world of the Reft. That is where they banished all of the Elder Magic too. They cast these spells that took all of the puddles of God magic and put it in the Reft, just this world that they found. A lot of the blood had soaked into the ground, and that created kind of a water table of blood underground, and that's the power that is called on by current day wizards, and it's much less powerful, and you don't feel those after effects. Okay. Dali's Tower. In this story, there's two towers of Dali. There's the one in a city named Bente, which is actually smaller and old, and the stairs are crumbling and all that kind of stuff. The tower itself is frozen, and the door has been blasted off. If you want to know how the door got blasted off and a lot of stuff about that tower, you can read the book Wrath of Madness, where one of the characters has to go to all of Dali's old towers that are all over the country and find different things at these towers, because he would build a tower and abandon it and build another tower and abandon it, all this kind of stuff. In the Land of the Reft, he built his main source of power, and that was that big tower that's burning down. You can see that tower on the cover to the book Wrath of Madness. There's a huge tower in the back of the cover, and it's actually on fire. That is Dali's old tower. It's banished to the land of the Reft, and spells were cast on it by old students of Dali to prevent him from getting to that tower ever again. Once they got mad at him, and he finds a way to get back to it in the book Wrath. That tower is where the Sour Eye is being kept. So there's that. That tower is also in the book Mestelvin. At one point, the wizards that run that tower came in and grabbed Segobar, one of the characters in Mestelvin, and forced him to come there and answer some questions. And he had to fight his way out of it and all this kind of stuff. So if the tower seems familiar to you, those are the two places that you can find it. Okay, so that's the tower that's still being built. The creatures that are building it are actually the residents of the Reft that were enslaved after the Elder Magic was sent there. You find out more about the Reft in the Madness Wars. They're in Wrath of Madness, Plight of Madness, and Fate of Madness. Okay, there is a mention of a god called the Maggot God. The Maggot God's name is Hakjahu. And Hakjahu is, the religion of Hakjahu is mentioned a lot in the book Chaste. Hakjahu is a god that feeds on other religions. So what he does is he attacks other religions by getting in and changing the message of the worshippers of that religion. And their prayers change to the gods, and their prayers change and warp the gods' beliefs. And so that's what happened to Harask. Harask used to be a guy, I think his name was Tinia, and the Maggot God was able to work its way into his religion, change the prayers of the followers, which changed the mind and methods of Harask and turned him into the creature at the end. Dali ended up capturing Harask, ripping one of his eyes out, turning it into the Sour Eye, and then trapped him in a place where he had to look into time itself, and it drove him mad. And now Harask is trying to destroy everything in the world. So that's the Maggot God. Once they've cut Harask free, and he jumps into the Sour Eye, he starts doing things, and they start witnessing him changing time, changing certain events, killing people, freeing people, that changed the course of the entire world. And you get to see those things happen. The after effects of those events are shown in the books that are either coming or have been put out. One is what they called the killing of Jocelyn. Harask was not actually trying to kill her, he was just trying to wound her. And what ends up happening because of that wound is in the book Legends of the Exiles. You can see the after effects of that wound and why everything happened that way. Another thing Harask does is he rips off the top of a mountain and he pulls out this cage. It's a steel box, and he rips it to pieces. This cage was created by the dwarves, and it's actually like 6 or 7 pieces of metal that fit together, and there are no locks and there are no doors. And they sank it into the top of a mountain and covered the rest of that mountain. That cage was made for the original dragon. Her name was Ember, and she was a major problem during the God War, and they ended up capturing Ember because they couldn't kill her. They captured her and put her in this cell in this mountain in the country of Kestic. The continent of Kestic. He frees her. Harask frees her. And when he frees her, she begins to conquer the world. And you can see what happened to her in the book Legends of Paralesque. She's actually a character in a short story called The Queen's Tale. Okay. The after effects of that story goes into Wrath of Madness, and you get to see what happens to her after the story of The Queen's Tale. So if you just want Ember's story, right now you can read Queen's Tale and you can read Wrath of Madness, and it shows the story and what happened with her. In the future, there is a book that is not coming out for quite a while, and I can look real quick to tell you when it's coming out. It is coming out on October 5th, 2029, and it shows the actual capturing of Ember and caging her and all that kind of stuff. At one point, Harask cripples Peter. This actually happens, and you can't tell that it's Harask, but this actually happens in a book called Drevrin. It's currently called Drevrin. I don't know if that's the name we'll go with in the end. Its working title is Drevrin, and it comes out October 5th, 2024. And it tells about the crippling of Peter and how that works. And there are things that Kai does to try to combat that and stop that from being a thing. All of those things are done behind the scenes. So again, this is all happening in a parallel story that is being fought between these two creatures, Kai and Harask. And so you'll see Peter get crippled, and you'll see what Kai does afterwards, but you won't be able to, anybody who just reads those books won't be able to realize that he gets crippled because of Harask and the reaction to it is made because of Kai. Okay. The other thing is the destruction of the Furies. Why do I keep putting this away? I keep needing this list. The destruction of the Furies comes into effect in a book called The City of the Lion. The City of the Lion is in the series of The Mountain, and it's all about all about the people from the mountain. Peter's Jordice and his people. The people, the cultures that are in Legends of the Exiles. Now, in the City of the Lion, there is an event that causes the destruction of the Furies, and Kai tries to fight that off by doing something else that, again, we do not see who he is and we do not see what he's done. But something else that he does tries to counteract the destruction in the City of the Lions. And then you mentioned Sakobar and the Hoodsman. Now, Sakobar is a character that I've been dealing with for a very long time. The first time we see him, he's in the book Legends of Paralesque. He's in a novella in that book that gives his background. Then we see him again in the book Mestelvin, as he is one of the main characters that helps Sob. Then he moves into the book Onslaught, and he's a major character. He's a side character in the book Onslaught. And he kind of falls out, and he leaves in the middle of the book. Then he comes back, and he's in Wrath, Plight, and Fate. And while he's in Wrath, Plight, and Fate, he is slowly building a crew to work for the Valkyrie. They're all slaves of the Valkyrie, which Taiga joined in this short story. The Hoodsmen are all evil people that are bound to the service of this creature called the Valkyrie, which is a sentry, which is like not quite a god, but like just below a god. So she is collecting all these evil people and binding them to her service so that she can use evil, powerful minds to hunt down other evil creatures and deal with them. She wanted a group of people that could fight for good, that had no conscience, that she wouldn't have to ask to do terrible things, they would just do them. So that's the Hoodsman, and that's Seikobar. And at the end of this story, Taiga meets up with Seikobar, because Seikobar is the leader of the Hoodsman. Taiga meets up with Seikobar, pledges to be his servant, is told that he's also, and you saw what Seikobar did, how Seikobar's cruelty, and calls him a slave and slaps him and all that kind of stuff. That happens in the book Wrath of Madness. You find that scene in the book Wrath of Madness shown by from Seikobar's point of view. And then through the rest of those books, you see Taiga serving Seikobar. That's the Hoodsman. Now, the Hoodsmen also show up in the book Hemlock and the Crown. And so, if you read those books, you can see those books take place after the Madness Wars. So you see the Hoodsmen, that there are much more Hoodsmen in those stories. And you can see some of the things they can do and some of the powers they have. So anyway, that is the key. That stuff right there is the key to unraveling the mystery of the short story of the slave. That's the first book in the Sour Eyes series. And what we're going to do is we're going to read them all. We're going to read all those short stories. And we're going to see how they connect to everything. So, that is our show for the day. And this will come up on Friday. I have decided we're going to do it every Friday. So this will come up on Friday, and you can look for it. It'll be on Twitter. It'll be on a bunch of different pages. I got a couple of friends that are helping me promote this, so you'll see them. You'll be able to find them on their pages and stuff. I got a lot of good friends that are trying to help me get this word out and get these stories out. So anyway, as before, I'm not going to say the things. You should do the things. And thank you for giving me some of your time and really looking into the world of Jesse Teller. Anyway, I'll see you next time.